Sony once stood as the undisputed king of consumer technology, a company so dominant that its innovations shaped entire generations. From the 1980s to the early 2000s, Sony was more than a brand. It was a cultural force. The Walkman rewrote how humans listened to music. The Trinitron changed how we watch television, and the PlayStation reshaped global entertainment. At its peak, Sony owned movie studios, music labels, record pressing plants, battery companies, chip factories, insurance divisions, and the world's most admired electronics department. Investors called it the Apple of the 1980s. Engineers treated it as the Silicon Valley of Japan, and consumers around the world trusted it without hesitation. Yet behind this empire lay a weakness Sony itself did not recognize. A weakness that would eventually allow faster, more focused rivals like Apple, Samsung, and Microsoft to dismantle its dominance. This is the dramatic story of how Sony lost the tech war it once led, not through a single failure, but through a series of decisions that slowly turned a titan into a follower. Sony's rise began with its obsession for engineering perfection. The company was founded in 1946 by Masaru Ibuka and Aki Morita, two men who believed Japan could rebuild itself through technology. Sony's early inventions, Japan's first tape recorder, the world's first transistor radio, and later the iconic Walkman, were not accidents. They came from an internal culture that prioritized experimentation over profit, creativity over cost-cutting. In 1979, when Sony introduced the Walkman, analysts predicted it would fail. Why would anyone want headphones and a device without speakers? But Sony had seen something the world hadn't: the desire for portable personal entertainment. The Walkman sold more than 400 million units worldwide and became the symbol of a generation. This success created the Sony mindset, an unshakable belief that Sony could reinvent any industry just by entering it. And for a while, that belief seemed entirely justified. But Sony's strength, its engineering obsession, would later become its biggest weakness. The company built brilliant devices, but it often ignored what consumers actually wanted. In the 1990s, Sony launched the minidisc, a technically advanced format with better durability and audio quality than CDs. Engineers loved it, music enthusiasts praised it, and Sony invested hundreds of millions into marketing it. But the world simply didn't care. CDs were cheaper and already popular. Sony repeated this mistake with Betamax in the 1980s, a video format superior to VHS in picture quality, but far more expensive. VHS won because it was accessible and cheap, and Sony's insistence on engineering perfection over market reality cost them billions. By the early 2000s, this pattern had become a corporate habit. Sony loved to build brilliant technology, but it struggled to build technology people chose. Then came the decision that hurt Sony more than any competitor ever could: the choice to protect its media empire instead of embracing digital disruption. In the late 1990s, Sony wasn't just an electronics company. It owned Columbia Pictures, Sony Music, and massive film and record catalogs. When MP3 players began to emerge, Sony executives panicked. Music executives feared piracy. Movie executives feared copying. So Sony made a now legendary mistake. It refused to support open digital formats. The company disabled MP3 support on early Sony music players, forcing customers to use a slow, restrictive Sony-only format called A-Track. While Sony protected its media divisions, Apple created the iPod simple, open, user-friendly. In 2001, Steve Jobs said something that hit at the heart of Sony's failure. "We're not defending a legacy business." Sony was, and it cost them the entire portable music industry. As music slipped through their fingers, another battlefield emerged: smartphones. Sony actually had the advantage. They made cameras, screens, batteries, audio chips, and had decades of experience in portable electronics. In the early 2000s, Sony Ericsson was one of the top 3 phone brands in the world. But internally, Sony was at war with itself. The electronics division wanted innovation. The media division feared piracy. The gaming division wanted control. Sony built phones that lacked unified vision or ecosystem strategy. Meanwhile, Apple launched the iPhone in 2007, and within 5 years, Sony's smartphone market share collapsed to below 2%. The same internal fragmentation that weakened Sony in music now destroyed its mobile ambitions. While Sony argued, Apple innovated. While Sony protected the past, Samsung built the future. Sony's smartphone failure was not caused by bad products. It was caused by a company unable to move as one. Another major blow came from South Korea. In the 1990s, Sony owned the global TV market. Its Trinitron displays were considered the best in the world, and customers paid premium prices for Sony televisions. But by the mid-2000s, Samsung and LG had mastered LCD technology faster and cheaper. Sony invested heavily in joint ventures, including a massive LCD partnership with Samsung, but it was already too late. Samsung treated displays as a long-term strategic investment, pouring billions into factories, creating global supply chains, and securing dominance. Sony treated it as another product line. By 2010, Samsung had surpassed Sony as the world's largest TV manufacturer. Sony's declining TV division lost billions for nearly a decade straight. What was once the crown of the Sony empire had become its most expensive burden. Even the PlayStation, Sony's greatest modern success, could not save the company from organizational chaos. PlayStation 2 was the best-selling console in history, with over 155 million units sold. But Sony mismanaged the transition to the PlayStation 3. Internal divisions insisted on using proprietary formats like Blu-ray, making the console expensive and complex. The PS3 launched at $599, far higher than the Xbox 360, and early sales were disastrous. It took years for PlayStation to recover. While the PlayStation brand survived and eventually thrived again, its success could not hide a deeper truth. Sony was no longer a unified innovator. It was a collection of powerful but disconnected kingdoms, each fighting to protect its own interests. By the 2010s, the consequences of decades of siloed decision-making became impossible to ignore. Sony had lost the portable music market to Apple, the TV market to Samsung, the phone market to both Apple and Samsung, the laptop market to cheaper competitors, and the portable media player market to smartphones. The company that once shaped the future now chased trends instead of setting them. Between 2008 and 2014, Sony laid off more than 40,000 employees, sold its iconic headquarters buildings in New York and Tokyo, spun off its PC business, and shut down multiple factories. For the first time in its history, analysts questioned whether Sony would survive. Ironically, the divisions Sony once tried to protect, movies and music, became some of the company's most profitable assets, while the divisions it once dominated, TVs, audio, phones, struggled to stay alive. Yet despite its decline, Sony never fully disappeared. The company learned to focus, simplify, and rebuild. It invested heavily in camera sensors, which are now used in over 70% of smartphones, including many of its competitors' devices. PlayStation grew into one of the world's most profitable entertainment ecosystems. Sony Music and Sony Pictures found success with top-selling artists and global franchises. But Sony never regained the position it held in its golden age and era when it told the world what the future would look like. The tech war Sony once led is now shaped by companies like Apple and Samsung, who learned from Sony's strengths while avoiding its biggest mistakes. Today, the story of Sony is more than a business case. It's a lesson in how innovation dies when a company becomes afraid of change. Sony lost the tech war not because it lacked talent or resources, but because it tried to protect its old empires instead of building new ones. It listened to its internal fears rather than its customers. It prioritized engineering purity over accessibility, and it underestimated the power of ecosystems, software, and user experience. The rise and fall of Sony is a reminder that in the world of technology, dominance is temporary, but adaptability is everything. As we look back on Sony's journey, from Walkmans to PlayStations, from brilliance to decline, we are witnessing one of the most dramatic transformations in modern business history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the rise and fall of a tech icon, make sure to like the video, share it with others who love history and finance, and subscribe to HistoriNomica for more untold stories of companies, empires, and economic revolutions. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video with another story the world forgot to tell.